Okay, you're on down here. It's on down there. I'm gonna turn it on upstairs.
Good Shabbos.
Had to unmute for a minute there. Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos, everyone.
Good Shabbos.
Shabbos.
Need my glasses to read everybody's names.
I don't know what the message is.
That's mine. Good Shabbos, everyone.
Shabbos.
Here we come.
They hear me, Robert? Does anyone know how what's his name?
How Jerry is?
Yeah. I tried calling him and I keep getting a busy signal and I can't get any answer.
Oh dear.
Alex was gonna try and talk to him.
Maybe Alex knows.
Alex, do you know how?
Larry?
You know how Jerry is, Alex?
I don't think he's on yet. He's not there yet.
I thought you'd be fixing my hair.
He's a what? Sure.
If it's my mail, give it to me. What?
Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.
Shabbos. Kristen.
You folks are separated today. Different rooms.
They'll be coming and going. There's all kinds of participation coming from the Matthews household this morning, so they need.
Excellent.
Oh, Sharon. Good to see you.
Hi, Sharon.
Good Shabbos, Sharon.
Good
Can't
Shabbos.
hear us yet. She's still got the three dots. There we go. Now everyone should wish her good Shabbos.
Hey,
Good Shabbos, Sharon.
Sharon.
Shabbos, everybody. It is so good to see you all. It really is. Really, really good.
Yes.
What a week.
Actually, Gina's here too. He's sitting in the recliner. That's him.
Yes. Great.
Hi, Jean.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Good to see your hand, Jean. Hope you're recovering.
Yeah,
Does
yeah.
it look much better, Judy? Does his hand look like it's way better?
Yeah.
Just glad to see it.
Yes.
If there was ever a Shabbos morning for you guys to be able to tune in from home, right? I mean, aside from the fact that coming to shul would be a pain, leaving the house on a morning when it's 40 degrees and pouring rain wouldn't be would only complicate matters. So
Thank you for those reminders to appreciate technology. I need those periodically, Alex. You know that. Thank you.
yeah, part of me was tempted to just broadcast from home this morning, but I figured someone should occupy the shul on a Saturday morning.
Oh, well, I'm sorry. You did it for all of us and probably gained 100 mitzvah points.
Good
Who's
morning.
counting?
Good to see everyone.
Good to see you, Johnny. Good to see you, Sandy from the Bronx. Good friend, and Angie from
Hi, Sandy. Hi to Judy.
and Angie from the Bronx. We've got
Hi,
like,
Sandy. Hi.
Jacob from the
Hi.
Bronx.
But we have a real Bronx contingent here,
Yeah.
don't we?
Cool.
And
Well,
half
yeah.
of us originated in New York anyway, so.
Not me.
Not me.
I
New
should have.
York is far and wide. Everyone's from New York.
How come I'm expecting J-Lo any minute?
I should have given him more publicity, but if you can tell, my dad is also wearing a tie this morning.
Yeah.
And that's because
Whoa.
he's actually going to be
Very
he's gonna be
handsome.
giving the Dvar Torah this morning. So that explains part of the New York fan club tuning in probably. And there might be a guest from Madison as well to hear his sage words, who my sister. So yeah,
I thought about wearing a tie this morning, but I said, it's too constricting.
Tie for Wheeler.
There's Wheeler.
Oh, he's in the
Well,
corner.
we see his picture. We can't really see him, Anna.
Yeah. Hi, Anna.
a collar isn't the same as a tie, Anna.
Yeah.
True.
I don't know how to get him in and out. Robert, talk to Wheeler.
Give it about 2 more minutes, and then we'll get going this morning.
I want to see Wheeler.
Shabbos, Barry.
Honey,
Here's
Hello.
Anna.
Hi.
Hello, Anna.
Yeah, there she is.
he's a boy.
Alex, you were gonna maybe fill us in on Jerry.
Yeah, I spoke to him yesterday. He is doing okay. I'll give a little bit more of a recount when we get to the healing service, but definitely want to be including him in our healing service. I don't expect him to join us, but I did speak to him yesterday, and he's doing okay.
I've tried many times and I haven't gotten him.
Yeah, you're getting a busy signal, or you're just getting his voicemail.
It's a bit.
Maybe his voicemail box is full.
We should make sure you have the right number then, Anna, because I've had him not pick up sometimes when I call, but I've never gotten a busy signal. And usually with modern cell phones, you don't really get busy signals anymore because they all have kind of automatic call waiting. So at the end of services, I'll make sure you have his right number so you can.
Could you send it to me too? I don't have his phone number.
Will do.
Maybe just put it in the chat might be the easiest thing if everyone wants it, Alex. And if that's okay with him. Don't do it if
I'm sure he would appreciate phone calls. Give me 1 sec. I'll put that in and then we'll get started this morning.
Get down.
Because I know it would make him glad that everyone was thinking of him.
I've got it right here. It's 508-423-1209.
Will you repeat that?
508.
Say it again.
508-423-1209.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you, Barry. All right. And on that note, obviously there's people we want to be keeping in our prayers this morning. So that seems like as good a place as any to get us started this morning. I'm going to go ahead and put everyone on mute. It's good to see you all and good to catch up a little bit. And of course, good to see Max back to help lead us through a little bit of the beginning of this morning's services. And we did also see a little wave from Jean's hand, who is sitting in the room with Sharon, but in a more comfortable seat. So it's good to have both of you back at services, and glad to know, Jean, that you are at home and that we know Sharon's taken real good care of you. So you've obviously also been in our thoughts a lot this week. I want to begin this morning along the lines of the way we usually begin, but with a little bit different source material. For those of you who read the Newburyport Daily News, every Friday morning they have the In the Spirit column, which is a rotating kind of sign up of local clergy members who write about kind of whatever feels salient to them on that given week. And I like some columns more than others. I did really like yesterday's column, which was written by Reverend Joan McPherson, who works in Amesbury, talking about how her own, she ascribes to a, it's not quite the same as we have, where we have the weekly Parsha that's tied to our own calendar, but she has her own, or she uses her own kind of cycle of readings that she draws on for her weekly liturgy. And what she wrote about yesterday was how she's often kind of surprised and impressed by how that manages to line up with what's going on in the world around her. And she was talking specifically about how this week's reading for them has to do with, is about Jesus's inaugural address, or Jesus's inauguration, which again, I don't totally have the background to know what she's talking about, and I didn't look up the relevant passage, but she was obviously able to connect that to what's going on, you know, in the country this week. And I was also thinking about kind of how our weekly portions line up with what's going on around us. And obviously this morning when we read Parshat Vayera, we read about Moses's kind of fully taking on the leadership in Egypt. Moses's kind of let my people go over and over again, and just his, you know, leading the people and fighting against slavery and inequity and oppression. And obviously, you know, with Martin Luther King Day coming on Monday, I think there's a lot of themes in our text these weeks that we can tie really directly to Reverend Dr. King's leadership and his own kind of style and sources and passion. And so in honor of Martin Luther King Day on Monday, I wanted to start with a couple excerpts from his letter from a Birmingham jail, which was originally published in 1963. A couple of you have sent me throughout the week either the whole letter or excerpts from the letter. It is long, and I kind of cribbed a couple paragraphs that I thought definitely tie into our Parsha and our own story of Exodus from Egypt, and were speaking to me this morning. Last September came the opportunity to talk with leaders of Birmingham's economic community. In the course of the negotiations, certain promises were made by the merchants. For example, to remove the store's humiliating racial signs. On the basis of these promises, the Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth and the leaders of the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights agreed to a moratorium on all demonstrations. As the weeks and months went by, we realized that we were the victims of a broken promise. A few signs briefly removed, returned, the others remained. A few signs briefly removed, returned. The others remained. Lamentably, it is a historical fact that privileged groups seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. Individuals may see the moral light and voluntarily give up their unjust posture, but as Reinhold Niebuhr has reminded us, groups tend to be more immoral than individuals. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well-timed in the view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see, with one of our distinguished jurists, that justice too long delayed is justice denied. Oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. The yearning for freedom eventually manifests itself, and that is what has happened to the American Negro. Something within has reminded him of his birthright of freedom, and something without has reminded him that it can be gained. And we'll revisit a couple more excerpts from this letter later on, but some of the ideas of just fighting for freedom, of kind of and some some thoughts of hardening of hearts, and really what it takes to kind of instigate and foster meaningful change, I think are really prescient as we continue to read through the beginning of the Exodus story, and think about how these lessons in this ancient text can still speak to us today. So with that, we are going to begin. I am going to put the Siddur up on the screen, and I'm going to lead us in Matovu, and then I will hand it over to Max for Berchot HaShachar. Matovu, Ohalecha Yaakov, Mishkenotecha Yisrael. Matovu, Ohalecha Yaakov, Mishkenotecha Yisrael. And we continue on page 65. If you would like to rise, please do so. And Max, I am excited to hand it over to you if you want to unmute yourself.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lasech vina lechavin ben yom uvelayla. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani b'tzalmo.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani Yisrael.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani ben chorin.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, pokeach ivrim.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, malbish arumim.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, matir asurumim.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, zokef kefufim.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, rokach haaretz al chamayim.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asa li kol tzorki.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamechin mitzeh degaver.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, ozer Yisrael bigvura.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, oter Yisrael b'tifarach.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hanoten leach koach.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamevir she'enai me'enai utnumah me'afapai.
Amen. Praise you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, removing sleep from my eyes and slumber from my eyelids. And we'll continue at the bottom of page 72 with Tzadik Katamar.
Tzadik Katamar Yifra Ka'erez Balvanum Yizke Shetulim Beved Adonai B'tzarot Eloheinu Yafrichu Od Yenuvim B'Seva Deshenim v'rananim yiyu lechagid ki asher Adonai tov v'lo avlatabo.
Thank you, Max, and we'll get back to you in a minute after we continue with our first mourner's Kaddish of the day. And if anyone would like to unmute to participate in the Kaddish or to say the Kaddish, I will give you the opportunity to do so now. Yitkadal,
No be Kadash, Shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Yomar Divra Kirute, Viamlik Malkute, Bekaye Kon, Yomechon, Chaye to call Beit Yisrael, Bagol, Bisman Kori, Ve'imru,
Amen.
Yehi
Yehi
Shmei
Shema
Rabba
Rabba
Mevarak,
Mevara
Leolam, Olamei
Almay
Omaya.
Almaya.
Yit Barak, V'yishtabach, V'yit Pa'ar, V'yit Romam, V'yit Naseh, V'yit Hadar, V'yit Alev, V'yit Alal, Shmei de Kudashah.
Brichu.
Rihu.
Ye'eh lo min kol birkata, V'shirato tushbachata, V'nechamata, Da miran B'yoma, V'yimru, Amen.
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 Ye'eh Shlomo Rabba min Shemaya, Chaim Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael, V'yimru,
Amen.
Amen.
Oseh Shalom B'mromav, Hu Yaseh Shalom, Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael.
Amen.
Amen.
And we will continue on the next page with Baruch She'amar. If you would like, please rise.
Baruch She'amar v'yachaya olam. Baruch Hu. Baruch Oseh v'yareshit. Baruch Omer v'osech. Baruch Gozer Kayim. Baruch Mirachem al haaretz. Baruch Mirachem al habriot. Baruch Mishalem Shekel Tov L'Reav. Baruch Halead V'Kam Lanesach. Baruch Podeh Umatzio. Baruch Shemo.
Praised are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, compassionate creator, extolled by your people, glorified by your faithful servants. We laud you with the psalms of your servant David. We extol you in song. We celebrate your fame and melody. We proclaim you sovereign, singular, eternal God. Praised are you, Adonai, sovereign, magnified with songs of praise. And if you are standing, you may be seated. Yasher Koach Max, thank you again for taking us through some of the beginning part of our davening this morning. It's great to have you prepping for your bar mitzvah. We're just about 2 months away, so I think we'll see him on some more Saturday mornings, but it's awesome to see your progress. We'll continue with Ashrei, and as always, if anyone is looking for 1 or 2 volunteers to lead us through the Ashrei, if anyone is interested. I saw Janny's hand, and Mike. Great. So Janny and Mike want to unmute yourselves, and Sharon, we'll save you for next week. You get a week off. You can take care of me.
If you want to do it, Sharon, that's fine. But I'll start it, okay? Ashrei Yoshvei Beiteko, Od Yaluko Selah.
I'm not right. Ashrei Ha'am Shekakalo. Ashrei Ha'am Shadonai Elohav.
Hilal David, Aramim Ko Elohai HaMelech, Baruch Hashem Kol Yolam Va'ed.
V'chal Yom Havakecha, V'chal Shemcha L'Olam Va'ed.
Gadol Adonai U'Melo Me'od, V'ligdoloto Ein Heker.
Doledo Yeshabat Ma'asecha, U'Gvurotecha Yagidu.
Hadar Kavod Hodecha, V'divrei Niflotecha Asicha.
Beznus Nerotecha Yomeru, Udolasecha Asaprena.
Zeker Raftucho Yabiu, V'tzidkocha Yiranenu.
Hanun Barachun Adonai, Erech Apai Mogdal Chesed.
Tov Adonai Lakol, V'rachamov Akol Masav.
Yadu Adonai Kol Ma'asecha, V'asidecha Yebachucha.
Kavod Malkuto Yomeru, Ugvuroto Yidaberu.
V'chodil Livnei Chadam Gerota, V'chavod Hadam Malchuto.
Malkuto Malkut Kol Olamim, Umemshaltecho B'kol Dor V'odor.
Samech Adonai L'chal HaNoflim, V'sokef L'chal HaPufim.
Einei Kol Elecho Yisaberu, V'atono Ten Lochem, Et Okolom Bito.
Hotea et Yadecha, Umaspil L'chai Chayratzon.
Tzadik Adonai Kol Devrocha, V'chasid B'kol Masav.
Karav Adonai halal karav, v'chol asher yikruhu be'emet.
Ritzon Yereov, Yaseh, V'yesha Shivatom, Yishma V'yoshem.
Shomer Adonai et kahahava, ve'et kahashayim yashmid.
Kilo Adonai Daber Pi, V'vorei Kol B'so Shem Kodshol Yelam Vo'ed. Banach Nunavore Kiyom Metav Yadolam. Hallelujah.
Yashikov to both of you. Thank you so much. And we will continue a couple pages ahead with Psalm 150. Let's sing together. Hallelujah, 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 El Bekocho. Hallelujah, hallelujah, Birki Auzo. Hallelujah, 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 Big Burotav. Hallelujah, hallelujah, Kerov Gulo. Hallelujah, 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 Beteka Shofar. Hallelujah, hallelujah, Benevel Vechinor. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, betofu malcho. Hallelujah, hallelujah, beminim ve'ugav. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, betil tele shama. Hallelujah, hallelujah, betil tele truha. Kol hanshama tehallel hallelujah. Kol hanshama tehallel hallelujah. Kol hanshama tehallel hallelujah. And we will turn to page 102. And if you would like, please rise for Az Yashir. We can get some practice in, because we'll be reading this passage in 2 weeks in its entirety after the Israelites finally make it out of Egypt. Az Yashir Moshe uvenei Yisrael et Hashira hazot Adonai vayomru le'mor Ashir al Adonai ki ha'oga sus verachvo rama vayam Ozi vezimrat yavayehi li lishua ze'eli ve'anvehu Elohei aviv aromenhu. And in the middle of the next page, Adonai loch le'olam va'ed. Adonai loch le'olam va'ed. Kila Adonai Mocha Moshe Bogaim, Lalu Moshe Bartel Shmot Harisav, Vaital Adonai Hamalucha, V'chai Adonai Lamelech Al Kol Haaretz, Vayom Adonai Echad, Ushemo Echad. And if you would like to sit down, you may. We'll continue in the middle of page 105 with Shochan, with Ha'el B'Tatzumot. El b'tatzumot uzecha, hagadol b'chlod shemecha, hagibor lamatzach, v'nora b'noratecha, hamelech hayoshev al kisei ram v'nisa, shochan ad marom v'kadosh shemaho, Chatzum Rav Tzadikim Balonai, L'Rishim Navatila, Befi Sharim Titalal, Udivrei Tzadikim Titbarach, Uvilshon Chasim Titromam, Ubekerev Kedoshim Titkadash, Uvmakalot Rivavot Amcha Beit Yisrael, B'nai Karshim Chamakin B'chol Dor Vador, Shekim Chovat Korichin L'Fanecha, Adonai Eloheinu, V'lei Avotenu, Lo Dola Le'el Shabbat L'Faer, L'Romim L'Hader L'Vrech L'Kales, Al Kol Divrei Shir V'Tishbachot, David Ben Yishai, Avdecha Meshichecha. Top of page 106, we rise for Yishtabach. Yishtabach Shimcha Lad Malkeinu, Ha'el Melech HaGadol V'Kadosh B'Shamayim V'Aretz, Ki L'Chanei Adonai Eloheinu V'Avoteinu, Shiru Shvacha Halav V'Zimra, Oz Memshah Netzach V'Agvara, Tila Tiferech, Tusha U'Malchut, Brachot Ve'odot Me'atav Yad Olam, Baruch Atah Adonai El Melech Gadol B'Tishbachot, El Ha'odot Adonai Niflot, Ha'bofer B'Shrei Zimra, Melech Elchei Ha'olamim. And if you'd like to unmute to respond to Chatzi Kaddish, now is the time. Yitkadash,
Yikadash,
Shemei Rabbah.
Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbo Mevorach, Le'olam Olomei Omaya. Riku.
Amen.
Amen.
Baruch et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai Mevorach, Le'olam Vaed.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach, Le'olam Vaed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Yotzer v'orei choshech, Oseh shalom, v'orei et hakol. Praise you, Adonai our God, ruler of the universe, creating light and fashioning darkness, ordaining the order of all creation. And if you're still standing, you may be seated. Continue at the bottom of page 107 with Ein Kirkacha, which will lead us into El Adon. Ein Kirkacha Adonai Eloheinu b'olam hazeh, v'ein zlatecha malkeinu l'chayei ha'olam haba. Efes d'iltecha goleinu mot HaMashiach, v'ein lo melech HaMoshienu l'tliat ha'metim. El Adon al kol hamasim baruch u'mvorach befi kol neshama gadlo v'tuvo malei olam da'at u'tfuna sovevi moto hanitkai el chayot hakodesh v'hedar v'chavo l'hamerkava zechut u'mishor lifnei chiso chesed rachamim lifnei kevodo tovim me'orot shebara Eloheinu yitzaram beda'at bevina ufaskel koach ugvura natan bahem liot moshlim bekerev tevel meleim ziv umfikim nogana ezivam bechol ha'olam Semechim b'teitam v'sasim b'boam osim b'yeim ha'ritzon konam Pe'er v'chavod notnim lishmot tzala v'rina lezecher malchuto kara l'shemesh v'yizrach or ra'a v'hitkin tzurat havana Shevach notnim lo kol tzeva marom tiferet u'gedula srafim v'ofanim v'chayot hakodesh nai 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 We'll continue at the bottom of page 110. Let's sing Or Chadash together. Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir, Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir, Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir, Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir. V'nizke kulanu mehera le'oro. V'nizke kulanu mehera le'oro. Baruch atah Adonai yotzer ha'me'orot. And on the top, page 111, let's read together in the English. Deep is your love for us, Adonai, our God, boundless your tender compassion. Avinu Malkeinu, you taught our ancestors life-giving laws. They trusted in you. For their sake, graciously teach us. Our Maker, merciful provider, show us mercy, grant us discernment and understanding. Then will we study your Torah, heed its words, teach its precepts, and follow its instruction, lovingly fulfilling all its teachings. Open our eyes to your Torah, help our hearts cleave to your mitzvot, unite all our thoughts to love and revere you. Then we will never be brought to shame, for we trust in your awesome holiness and will delight in your deliverance. Bring us safely from the four corners of the earth and lead us in dignity to our holy land. For you are the source of deliverance. You have called us from all peoples and tongues, constantly drawing us nearer to you, that we may lovingly offer you praise, proclaiming your oneness. Praised are you, Adonai, who loves the people of Israel. Baruch atah Adonai, habocher b'Moishel b'Yahava. I invite anyone who wants to unmute and join together in the Shema and B'Yahafta to do so now.
Shema
Yisrael,
Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Asher Anovi Netzavta Hayom Alavovecha Antam B'Moneka B'Dibarta Bam B'Shivteka B'Veiteka V'Lektecha V'Derek V'Shavtecha V'Pnecha Shartam Liot Al Yodecha V'Hoyeletotecha V'Beinenecha Avtam Al Mizopetecha U'Visharecha
אם שמוע תשמעו מצוותיי אשר אנוכי מצווכם היום לאהבה את אדוני אלוהיכם ולעבדו בכל לבבכם ובכל נפשכם ונתתי את ארצכם בתורה מקוש ואספת דגנך ותירשך ויצרך ונתתי עשב ושדך לבנתך ואכלת ושבעת הישמרו לכם פניכם לבבכם וסרתם ועברתם אלוהים אחרים השתחוויתם להם וחרף אדוני בכם ועצר את השמיים ולא יהיה מטר והאדמה ולפני נתיבולה ועברתם מהרה מעל הארץ הטובה אשר אדוני נותן לכם ושמתם את דבריי אלה על לבבכם ועל נפשכם וקשרתם אותם לאות על ידכם והיו תותפות בין עיניכם לימדתם אותם את פניכם ובקרבם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך למען ירבו מימי בניכם על האדמה אשר נשבע אדוני לאבותיכם לתת להם כי מהשמיים על הארץ ויאמר אדוני משה לאמור דבר אל בני ישראל ואמרת עליהם ועשו להם ציצית Al Kanfei Bigdehem Udorotam Vinatnu Al Tzitzit Hakanaf Betil Techelet Vayalachem Letzitzit Uritem Oto Uschartem Et Kol Mitzvot Adonai Vasitem Otam Velo Taturu Acharei Lvavchem V'acharei Einechem Asher Atem Zonim Achareihem Leman Tizkeru Vasitem Et Kol Mitzvotai V'tem Kedoshim L'Elohechem Ani Adonai Elohechem Asher Tzivti Etchem Me'eretz Mitzrayim Liot Lachem Le'Elohim Ani Adonai Elohechem Emet Adonai Elohechem Emet. And we'll turn the page and in just a moment continue in the middle of 114 with Michamocha. After that, we'll begin the Amidah together. I'll give everyone the chance to unmute to participate in the Kedusha, and then we'll take a couple minutes for silent and individual prayer, reflection, and meditation. But first, the middle of page 114. Tilo Elyon Baruch Barach Moshe Miriam Bnei Yisrael L'chanu Shira B'simcha Rabba V'amru Chulam Mi Chamocha V'elim Adonai Mi Kamocha Nedar V'Kodesh Nora Tehilot Osef Eleh Shira Chadasha Shivkulim Shimcha Sfat Hayam Yachad Kulam Hodu V'Michu V'Amaru Adonai Imloch Le'olam Va'ed Tzur Yisrael Kuma Be'ezrat Yisrael Ufdei Chinumecha Yehuda V'Yisrael Go Aleinu Adonai Tzvot Shemo Kedosh Yisrael Baruch Atah Adonai Gal Yisrael. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu v'le'avoteinu v'imoteinu Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'konei Hakol, V'zocher Chasdei Avot v'Imahot, U'mei Gol Ibnei Bneihem, Leman Shemo v'Ahava, Melech Ozer U'Fokedu Moshiach U'Magen, Baruch Atah Adonai, Magen Avraham U'Foked Sarah, Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai, Mechayim Eitim Atah Rav Le'Oshia, Mashiv Haruach U'Morid Hagashem, Mechalkel Chaim B'Chesed, Mechayim Eitim B'Rachamim Rabim. Somech Noflim V'Rofei Cholim, U'Matir Asurim, U'Mekayim Emunato L'Shenei Afar, Michamocha Ba'al Gefurot, U'Mido Melach, Melech Memit U'Mechayei, U'Matzmiach Yeshua, V'Ne'man Atah L'Chayot Meitim. Baruch Atah Adonai Mechayei Hamein.
Amen. Nekadesh Shem Olam Kishem Shemakdishim Oto Bishmei Morom Kakotu Vayad Neviecho V'Kol Zel V'Yomar
Nekadesh Shimcha Ba'olam Kishem Shemakdishim Oto Bishmei Morom Kakatu Vayad Neviecho V'Kol Zel V'Yomar.
Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot, Melech Oz Bekol Rash Gadol, Adir V'Kozak Mashmin Kol, Minasim Lumasrofi, Matam Baruch Yomeru.
Az Bekol ra'ash gadol adir v'chazak mashmim ko az b'kol ra'ash gadol adir v'chazak mashmim ko mitnasim leumat serafim mitnasim leumat serafim Lumatam Baruch Yomeru.
Baruch Kavod Adonai Mikomo. Mimikomo Malkeinu Tofia Bitim Loko Leinu. Kima Kakim Anaknu Lok Motai Tim Lokitzion. Bekorobio Menu Liolam Voed Tishkon. Tikadal Vitikadash Betok Yerushalayim Irko. The door Bodor Netzach Netzach.
במקום חמל כמתופיה ותמלוך כי מחכים אנחנו לך מתי תמלוך בציון בקרוב ימינו לעולם ותשכון תתקדל ותתקדש בתוך ירושלים עירך לדור ודור לנצח נצחים
Vienenu Ador Homor Shirei Uzecha
Oy David Mashiach Tzidkecha
Yimlok Adonai Leolam Elohai Etzion Ledor Vodor Hallelujah
לדור ודור נגיד גדלך ונצח צחים קדושתך נקדיש ושבחך אלוהים מפינוי מושלם לד כי המלך גדול וקדוש אתה ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש. Oseh shalom bimramav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, Yal kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, Yal kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'meru. Amen. And we'll continue with the full Kaddish, which I won't put up on the screen, but I'll give you the opportunity to unmute to respond to the Kaddish. Yitkala v'yikadash me'rabah.
Amen.
Ve'alma divrach irtei ve'amlich malchutei v'chayechon v'mefon v'chay l'chol Beit Yisrael b'agala v'zman kariv v'meru.
Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba Mizora, Ve'olam Le'ol Me'olaya,
Shabbat, V'par v'shema minasei, V'tadar v'tadar shmei l'kudesha, Ve'ela mikol berchata v'shirata, Tishpata v'nechamata, Damiran be'alma v'meru.
Amen.
Kabel tzonadon, V'chol Beit Yisrael, Kadam v'lohon v'shmaya v'meru.
Amen.
Yehi Shalom Rab min Shemaya, V'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'meru.
Amen.
Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'al kol
Amen. Amen.
I'm going to put us all back on mute, and I will ask Barry Pastor to unmute himself one more time, and I will put the beginning of the Torah service up on the screen, and we will open the Ark together.
Ein como kobelim Adonai v'ein kamasecha malchusecha malchus kol olamim umemshaltecha b'chol dor v'dor. Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed. Adonai oz le'amo yitain. Adonai yivarech esamo b'shalom. Aporachamim. Eitiv avertzon choes Zion. Tivnei chomos Yerushalayim. Ki v'chol levad b'tachnu. Melech el ram v'nisa. Adon olamim. Vayehi ben so Aharon, Vayomer Moshe, Kuma Adonai, V'yafutzu oivecha, V'yanusu misanecha mipanecha, Ki mitzion teitze Sorah. Ki mitzion teitze Sorah, u'devar Adonai miYerushalayim. Baruch shenasan Torah, Torah. Baruch shenasan Torah, Torah. Li'amo Yisrael.
Thank you so much, Barry. Anyone who's standing may be seated. In just a minute, we'll get an intro to this morning's Parsha from my dad. I just want to say first, once again, Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and Yasher Koach to everyone whose voices we've already heard this morning. It is bringing me a measure of extra comfort to have so much participation from you all this morning. I don't know what brought this on, but I had a dream last night that I got to shul and like none of my Zoom things worked. And so I was like standing here and just like sweating all by myself and couldn't connect to anyone. And it was very distressing. So even like the cacophony of hearing you all say the Shema and the Yahafta together this morning brought me an incredible amount of joy. And that's to say nothing of having Max participate and, hearing two of you do a duet for Ashrei and all the participation that is still to come. So thank you all for being here this morning. And it is now my honor to turn it over to my father, who will be giving our Dvar today. And so he'll give an intro, and then I'll take it back for the Torah reading and then hand it back to him after the Haftorah. So he will guide us through Parshat Vayera this morning.
Thank you, Alex. I've given several versions of this talk several times over the past couple of decades at our synagogue in the Bronx and at our personal Seder table, but I've never given it on a more appropriate date, the weekend that we commemorate Dr. King's birthday. Yesterday, he would have been 92. And I thank Alex for the honor of letting me do this today. I'm certain we could have a lively discussion this morning about where the events of this Parsha that we're about to read rank among the seminal events of our history of Jews. Could they be ahead of the Akedah, the sacrifice of Isaac, or behind the giving of the Ten Commandments? Whatever your opinion, and I don't want to have that discussion here, I think you have to acknowledge that the story of the Israelites' exodus from Egypt is central not only to the holiday of Passover, but to our cultural identity. For centuries, undoubtedly since they were first inscribed, if not actually uttered, the words, "Let my people go," have been a rallying cry for freedom, not only for Jews, but for oppressed peoples all over the world. A discussion of "Let my people go" would certainly be appropriate for this Parsha. But most of my remarks this morning are going to focus on the science of the events that are described in this Parsha, rather than relating it to more current events. As a preface, I'd like you to keep in mind that the descriptions of the plagues that Alex will read in a few minutes may, in fact, be more vivid than real, although I'll offer as an aside that at least one is vivid enough so that during the struggle for Soviet Jewry years ago, the Jewish Defense League, remember them, released a box of frogs in the Aeroflot office in Manhattan. Other than the original source, however, that we read this morning, there's scant historic, archaeological, or literary evidence that the plagues actually occurred. No Egyptian text has ever been discovered that mentions the events described in the Chumash, and no artifact has ever been found that would prove the presence of the Hebrew nation in Israel. Also, the period during which the pyramids were built, which has been pretty much established as between 2550 and 2490 BCE, regardless of who built them, those dates would predate the period of slavery that drives the events of the Exodus. Even the Roman Jewish historian Josephus Flavius, who lived in the 1st century CE, wrote that these events, quote, "might be God's will or of natural origin. Let everyone believe at his own discretion," unquote. So maybe the story is the natural exaggeration of the victors, as the Israelites certainly were, in a struggle over a powerful oppressor. We understand, of course, that winners not only get the spoils, they also get to write the history books. Maybe that explains why, despite extensive excavations of ancient Egypt, no records have been unearthed to support the biblical story. The Egyptians would hardly have wanted to preserve evidence of a defeat. This idea seems plausible to you. You can carry it a step farther. Maybe the plagues affected the Israelites too, but since they wrote the history, they just left out the bad parts. Or if we accept the premise that our forefathers did reside in Egypt, that they were enslaved there, and that they ultimately won their freedom, maybe the story just grew in its retelling, as folk tales are wont to do, and that such exaggeration was the only way that events that were so extraordinary could be explained. That is, by attributing them to a higher power. After all, the Bible is full of events and descriptions of things that defy modern logic and understanding. There are, however, a number of scientific disciplines, epidemiology, epizoology, bacteriology, virology, entomology, agronomy, meteorology, and even sociology, that offer plausible explanations of the events of which we are familiar from the Passover Haggadah, if not from the Chumash itself. Much of the information I'm going to convey in this talk, I first learned 25 years ago when I worked for the New York City Department of Health and heard a presentation on the subject by Dr. John Marr, a noted epidemiologist who a few years earlier had been the director of the department's Bureau of Communicable Diseases. Dr. Marr explained that he became interested in the subject in the early 90s, shortly before I heard him speak, when he read an article in the British medical journal, The Lancet, about a patient suffering from a case of scabies. The headline was "Third Plague of Egypt?" ? That piqued his professional interest, and he soon became convinced that the story of the plagues was the first written example of what today might be called emerging infections. Scientific explanations offered by Dr. Marr are generally supported by the footnotes in the Etz Chaim as well as other places, so consider the possibilities as Alex reads the verses, and I'll discuss the details when he finishes and after we hear the Haftarah. Alex, over to you.
Thanks, Dad. And we will we'll get back to you for the second half of that talk after the Torah reading. And thank you for giving us that framing and things to keep in mind. We will pick up this morning in chapter 7, verse 8 of Exodus, which is on page 357 in the Eitz Chaim, and we really do kind of get right to the action, right? We get right to Moses's first dramatic supernatural encounter with Pharaoh, where he gives the signs of the snake, and then we get right into to the blood and frogs and all the familiar plagues. I know that Dad is leaving, wants to have question and answer and discussion possibly after he finishes the whole thing. But does anyone have any comments or questions before we dive in this morning to the actual text? Great. Well then, Dad, you get to sit back and relax for a couple minutes. And yeah, we'll pick it up. I'll ask anyone who wants to unmute and say La'asok b'divrei Torah with me, and then we will turn over to the text. We'll pause at least once because I know Mike has Yortzeit for his mom this week, and so we'll include an El Maleh in her memory. And as always, if there's any other comments or questions, put it into the chat, and I'll do my best to keep an eye on that and to pause if we want to have any discussion during the Torah reading. First, I will unmute us all and we'll say La'asok b'divrei Torah together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. And once again, we're on page 357 if you have an Eitz Chaim. Amen. Vayomer Adonai El Moshe ve'Aaron lemor ki yedaber alechem paro lemor tenu lachem mofet ve'amarta el Aharon kach et matcha ve'hashlech lifnei paro yehi letanin. Vayavo Moshe ve'Aaron el Paro vayasu chen kasher tziva Adonai vayashlech Aaron et matehu lifnei Paro v'lifnei avadav vayihi letanin vayikra gam Paro lachachamim velam chashvim vayasu gam hem chartumei Mitzrayim V'lahatehem kein vayashlichu ish matehu vayu letaninim Vayivla mate Aaron et matotam. Vayechezak lev paro velo shama alehem kasher diber Adonai. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe kaved lev paro me'ein l'shalach ha'am lech el paro baboker hine yotzei hamayma v'nitzavta likrato al sfat ha'yaor v'hamatei asher nepach v'nachash tikach v'yadecha v'amarta elav Adonai Elohei ha'ivrim shlachani elecha lemor shalach et ami vayavduni ba'midbar v'hine lo shamata ad ko amar Adonai bezot teda ki ani Adonai hine anochi makeh b'mateh asher b'yadi al hamayim asher b'yaor v'neheflu ledam v'hadaga asher b'yaor tamut uva'ash hayaor v'nil'u mitzrayim lishtod mayim min hayaor. So let's pause there just for a moment before we get in really to the meat of the plagues. Just to tie things a little bit more to what my dad has started to talk about and will continue to talk about. We just read about Moses and Aaron's first sign to Pharaoh, and it's the turning of Aaron's staff into a snake or a serpent or something along those lines. And one of the commentaries I was reading says something similar to the themes that my dad is developing, right? That there are even kind of modern snake charmers who know the pressure point somewhere in a snake's neck that you can kind of give it a squeeze and it'll turn into a stiff, almost staff-like object. And then, you throw it on the ground and that snaps it out of its stupor and it turns into a snake. So there is kind of even modern science and resonance to some of these things that are perceived as supernatural or magic or whatever it might be. We'll pause here and we'll include an El Male for Mike's mom. And I also got a message from the Golems that they have a Yortzeit this morning. So we'll do one El Male here for Mary Perlman, and then we'll pause again a little bit further on and include a second one. But first, we're going to say an El Male for Mary Perlman, Miriam Bat Yaakov Vileh. El Male Rachamim Shochein Bamromim Hamtzei Menucha Nechona Al Kanfei Ashchina B'malot Kedoshim Uteorim Kezor Rakiam Asirim Et Nishmat Miriam Bat Yaakov Vileh Shachal Lama Ba'avur Shanach Mitpalim Bad Haskarat Nishmata Began Eden Temenuchata Vachein Bal Rachamim Yashtir Beseter Knafav Leolamim Vitzor Bitzorachem Nishmata Adonai Hu Nachalata V'tanuach B'shalom Al Mishkava V'nomar Amen. And Mike, if you want to unmute and share any memories or thoughts on your mom.
Okay, yeah, so many things I would want to say, and I'll try to be coherent about it. My mother was one of 6 children, although one died in childhood from being run over by a streetcar in Philadelphia where they lived. And her parents ran a grocery store. And were moderately successful. Grandfather Yaakov or Jacob was, a businessman and quite well recognized in that respect. So my mother, the one thing I would say is if she had the opportunity, which female people have now, I think her life would have been a lot different. She was very outgoing. She was very enthusiastic, and she was nice to everybody. She was one of the people that always found good in people, no matter who they were, and always had something good to say about them. and she graduated from high school, but neither she nor any of her siblings ever attended college. And she taught Sunday school in Jewish, I guess, a synagogue, but I don't remember. I think they called them Talmud Torahs back then. And she became a high school secretary, and she didn't get married until she was in her 30s. And then she had me, my middle brother, and my younger brother, who was passed away last April, right in succession within a period of 3 years. And but she raised us, and my father was there sometime too. I mean, I won't go into that, but I've talked about that before. And so my mother, later when we grew up, she was very active in Hadassah. She was very active in synagogue sisterhood. She never learned to read Hebrew, but she said all the prayers and sometimes butchered them, but she liked that. I just want to say this, in some respects, your mother, Judy, reminds me of my mother, her personality and so forth. And I just wanted to say that because when I see Judy's face like now, I do think of my mother. Thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing, Mike, and thank you for bringing her memory in. And I also have a feeling that since you decided to share that last thought, you're going to have to, have a phone call where you explain that at much more length, because you just opened yourself up to a world of sharing memories, I would guess. Yeah, thank you for sharing. And I think the couple things just that her parents' names are Yaakov and Leah, which is just like a wonderful little, kind of Torah resonance to have jump out, right? When the patriarchs and matriarchs are kind of recreated in that way. And also just that idea of, not necessarily reading the Hebrew or knowing what the Hebrew is, but participating along with it, kind of come hell or high water, is something that I think a lot of us can really relate to. So thank you for.
Let me just add one thing. Her parents, Yaakov and Leah, were first cousins, but
all the more so then. Thank you, Mike. All right, we are going to pick back up with the first few plagues. We're about to see the Nile turn to blood, and we are. If you do have an Eitz Chaim, we're on page 359, chapter 7, verse 19. And I'm going to put it up on the screen. Amen. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe emor el Aharon kach matcha unete yadcha al meimei Mitzrayim al naharotam al yorehem val agmehem ve'al kol mikveh meimehem vayudam V'hayadam v'chol eretz Mitzrayim uva'etzim uva'avanim v'yasu chen Moshe v'Aaron kasher tziva Adonai v'yarim b'mateh v'yach et hamayim asher v'yaor le'enei Faro ule'enei avadav Vayhafchu kol hamayim asher bayaor ledam v'hadaga asher bayaor meta vayivash hayaor v'lo yachlu Mitzrayim lishtot mayim min hayaor vayhi hadam b'chol eretz Mitzrayim vayasu chen chartumei Mitzrayim belatehem Vayachazak lev Paro v'lo shama alehem kasher diber Adonai vayifen Paro vayavo el beito v'lo shat libo gam lazot vayachperu kol Mitzrayim sfiot hayor mayim lishtot ki lo yachlu lishtot mimei hayor Vayimale shivat yamim acharei hakot Adonai et hayaor Vayomer Adonai el Moshe bo el Paro v'amarta elav Ko amar Adonai shalach et ami vayavduni v'ima'inacha le'shaleach Hine anochi nogef et kol gvulcha b'tzvardeim b'sharat hayor tzvardeim ve'alu v'al v'veitecha uvachadar mishkavcha ve'al mitatecha uveveit avadecha uve'amecha uvetanurecha uve'misharotecha uvecha uve'amecha uvechol avadecha ya'alu hatzvardeim. So we're 2 plagues in. We've had the blood and the frogs. We'll pause there for one more second. And just again, another commentary, not necessarily to think about this morning, but to really think about, one, really as we read through the entire rest of the Torah, is just Moshe and Aaron and their roles working alongside each other, and kind of who is acting in what way, who's taking the main leadership role at what time, and what that might signify. That'll be a fascinating thing to watch develop over the course of the entire rest of the Torah. And just to bring up, we've already mentioned it a couple times this morning, but the idea of hardening of Pharaoh's heart, and what exactly that means, right? To kind of willfully ignore the dire reality around you, and what are the consequences of that. I think something that has a lot of resonance today, and we'll read about that process happening over and over and over again. And we just got our first example of that with the plague of blood. And so before we go back to the Torah reading, we will pause one more time. Our friend from Riverdale, Hank Gollum, has yortzeit for his mom this week, Bat Shabbat Moshe Issachar Vedorit. If those of you from Newburyport haven't gotten a chance to meet the Gollums, they've come pretty regularly over the course of the last couple months, and it's great to have them join us. And maybe after services this morning, take a minute to say hi. So we will take a moment to include an El Maleh for Hank's mother. El Maleh Rachamim Shochein Vamromim Hamtzei Menucha Nechona Al Kanfei Ashchina B'Ma'alot Kedoshim Uterim Kezora Ki Amasirim Et Nishmat Batya Bat Moshe Issachar Vedorit Shalcha Leolama Ba'avur Shanach Mitpalim Bad Haskarat Nishmata Began Eden Temnuchata Lachin Balarachamim Yastir Beseter Knafav Leolamim Vitzor Vitzorachim and Nishmata Adonai Hu Nacholata V'tanuach B'Shalom HaMishkava V'nomar Amen. And Hank, if you want to take a moment to share anything about your mother, if you want to, if not, that's fine too.
Okay, there we go. So like my mother had 3 boys also, but she was a little smarter. She did it over 6 years. My mother was kind of like an interesting woman, little tough on her family, I must say. But she did a lot of great volunteer work. And one of the things she was involved with was smuggling siddurs and tanachs and tefillin and stuff like that into the old Soviet Union. And at her shiva, this guy came up to me who was really quite a seedy character, because he obviously was a terrible chain smoker, really stunk. And he said to me that he worked for my mother back in the 80s. And he said that what was interesting was that there was always a stream of celebrities coming in to see her because they wanted to be involved in this project. So I thought that was kind of nice. We never knew about it. Thank you for the time.
Thanks for sharing, Hank, and thanks for bringing your mother in as well this morning. And especially even that story of smuggling things into the Soviet Union. And then again, thinking about, reading the letter from a Birmingham jail and talk of kind of, Reverend King talks pretty extensively about like the difference between breaking just laws and breaking unjust laws, and the role of civil disobedience, and really kind of acting for what you deeply believe is right, and what's moral. So thinking about kind of what your mother's actions were in that context as well this weekend. I appreciate you bringing that in and tying that in. So we are going to turn back to the Chumash. We are in chapter 8, verse 1. And we're going to read, I think, 15 more verses to get to the end of this morning's triennial reading. And so we're about to get the frogs in the bed and frogs on his head and all that. If anyone wants to sing along as we go. Amen. Vayomer Adonai El Moshe. Emor el Aharon, nitei et yadcha b'matecha al haneharot, al hayorim ve'al hagamim, ve'ha'al et hatzvardeim, al eretz Mitzrayim, vayet Aharon et yado al meimei Mitzrayim, v'ata'al hatzvardeya v'techas et eretz Mitzrayim, vayasu chen hachartumim v'latehem, Vayalu et hatzvardim al eretz Mitzrayim, vayikra Faro leMoshe ularon, vayomer hatiru al Adonai, vayaser hatzvardim mimeni umei ami, vashalcha et ha'am, vayizbechu l'Adonai, vayomer Moshe leFaro, hitpaer alai lematai atir lecha, L'avadecha u'la'amecha le'achrit hatzvardim mincha u'mi-batecha
You don't have to rush.
u'mi-batecha rak bayaor tisharna vayomer le'machar vayomer kidvarecha le'man teda ki ein k'Adonai Eloheinu v'saru hatzvardim Mimcha u'mi-batecha u'me'avadecha u'me'yamecha rak be'or tisharna vayetze Moshe ve'Aaron me'im Paro vayitzak Moshe el Adonai al dvar hatzvardim asher sam lefaro vayas Adonai kidvar Moshe vayamutu hatzvardim min habatim min hachatzerot u'min hasadot Vaytzbru otam chamorim chamorim, vativash haaretz, vayar paro, ki hayta harvacha, v'hachbed et libo, v'lo shama alehem, kasher diber Adonai, vayomer Adonai, el Moshe, emor el Aharon, netei et matcha, v'hach et afar haaretz, V'hayalechini b'chol eretz Mitzrayim, vayasu chen, vayet Aaron et yado b'matehu, vayach et afar haaretz, vatehi hakinim, va'adam u'va'behema, kol afar haaretz hayakinim b'chol eretz Mitzrayim, vayasu chen achartumim b'latehem, l'hotzi et hakinim v'lo yacholu, Vatehi hakinam be'adam u'va'behema, vayomru hachartumim el paro etzba Elohim hi, vayachazach lev paro v'lo shama alehem kasher diber Adonai. And that last image that we got also, I think, is a powerful one that really carries through so much of the Exodus story and the Passover Seder, right? Etzba Elohim, the finger of God, the hand of God, kind of what those symbols of might are and what is the strength in each of these 10 plagues, and seeing each of them as both, the 10 plagues as a whole, and really looking at each one of them as its own freestanding, miraculous or nature-based show of power, as we'll get back to discussing in a couple more minutes. We're going to pause now for the healing service. Before I turn it over to Sharon, I just want to give a quick update, like I said I would. I know the healing service is both universal and deeply personal, right? So we are trying, especially in these times, to kind of include as many people as we can in our minds and our prayers, but also recognizing there are people, who we're deeply connected to, who need our healing as well. And I did speak to Jerry before Shabbos yesterday. I spoke to him a couple weeks ago, and he told me, that he was, after the first Shabbos, he didn't come. He said he just wasn't generally feeling well. And then I reconnected with him this week, and he said that he was diagnosed with the coronavirus. They tested his entire complex, and he came back with a positive test. He doesn't know how he got it. He is resting and recuperating in his apartment. His son is taking good care of him. He's closely monitoring all his own signs as best he can. And when I spoke to him yesterday, he feels like he's not getting worse, but also, I think he said it feels like he's been hit by a train, were his words. Like it's just kind of a slow road to recovery for him. So I know he appreciates calls and check-ins. I don't know how much he's actually answering his phone, but I did manage to catch him yesterday, and he definitely wanted me to let everyone know that, he's doing the best he can to get back here as quickly and healthfully as possible, and appreciates that we're thinking of him. So as I turn it over to Sharon and we think about, again, all the different people that need our prayers for healing and our good thoughts, please make sure you include Jerry in that as well.
Sorry about that. I think I got myself on. Did I get myself unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you. So you took a week off, and now you're all out of practice.
I'm a little discombobulated today. We have a sleeping person right on the other side of the computer who I'm semi-focused on. Before we start the healing service, I just really want to say a mass thank you to everybody here. I feel like we really, really do share healing energy with one another. And whenever I know someone who might want to be on the healing list, I always ask them first, if it's okay with them. Sometimes they say, mutter my name, but don't say it out loud, or use my Hebrew, whatever. And I always say, yeah, I don't know if it helps, but it can't hurt. And I just want to tell everyone, I really feel like it helps. It helps, just the thoughts and the prayers and the energy that comes from each one of you, each one of us together, I think really, really does help. So thank you all. And let's please sing together the song with which we begin the healing service. Mi sheberach avotenu mekor habracha limotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mi sheberach imotenu mekor habracha la'avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. Mi sheberach avotenu ve'imotenu Abraham, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov, Moshe v'Aharon, David u'Shlomo, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel v'Leah, Bilhah v'Zilpah, v'Yivarech v'Yirafeh et hacholim b'nei Avraham v'Sarah, b'nei Adam v'Chava. May God, who blessed our ancestors, bless and heal all those in need of it now. Shoshana Bat Pinchas v'Chana, Nancy Peace, Louisa McCleary, Eliyahu B'Tzalel ben Pinchas v'Chana. Meir Ben Fega Aaron Yitzchak, Dennis McNeely, Jess Kramer, Alexis Watson, Joel Gordon, May Daub, Bob Jelly, Bruce Mallory, Alan Mann, Barbara Dowd, John O'Brien, Jacques Mansey, Carol Barker, Catherine Doloff, Ken Bosey, Chana Bat Rivka, Lorraine Daniluk, Denise Stelmach, Yitzchak Ben Yisrael, Madeline Blake, Rachel Barcelona, Corey Brown, Kara Smoley, Adam Stander, Fotios Rallis, Chana Esther Bat Ayala Hadar, and Jerry is Yaakov. Alex, do you know Yaakov Yitzchak Ben?
I rely on you more for the names, but we'll.
Well, we know we're including Jerry, and I know it's Yaakov Yitzchak, but I don't remember the rest, so I apologize for that. Anybody else who has a name that you would like to have mentioned in the healing prayers, if you would let us know now, and Alex can unmute you.
Yeah, Mike. You got on mute, Mike.
Yeah,
Yep, there we are. Bart Gerald, Dina Bracha Bat Miriam. I also will mention Anna Schenker, just because. That's it. Oh, I want to make a comment about Jerry getting corona there, because he thought, I don't know if it was this group, but another group where he said that there are people, he lives in what would be called a congregate facility, and people there are not taking precautions, he said. And Amesbury has a very high rate, 10 cases a day or average since December in Amesbury, which is pretty high. Okay. People don't wear masks.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, Sue, if you want to unmute.
Bruno and Lori Schurz and Hadass Rogolski.
Thanks. Barry?
Ayla Bas Barrelade for Fred Camero, Joanne Hurwitz, Mike Hurwitz. Go ahead.
Edel Nesha Bat Zev Ve'eta Nesha, Chaya Yehudit Bat Ruvain Eliyahu Chalevi Ve'edel Nesha, Avraham Ben Zev Ve'eta Nesha, Chaya Surah Bat, she doesn't know the rest of the name, Anita Wilson, Daniel Rutez, Nat Hoskin, Greg Bowe, Kathy Whittemore, Patricia Kincaid, MD, and her husband, Gregory Bowe, Andrea Bursack Leung, Kate Leung, Woody Leung, Pam Matson.
Thank you. Any other hands? Yeah, Angie.
Avi Ben Yaakov and Daniel.
And Leslie, was that a hand from you? You want to unmute?
Mary Beth Joseph.
Thank you. Any other hands that I didn't see? And if we really mentioned all the names, we would be here all morning and all night. So let's just take another couple seconds to include everyone who we're thinking of, people whose names we know, people whose names we don't know, and really everyone far and wide who's in need of some extra healing this week. Sharon, whenever you're ready.
Before we finish, I just want to add that I know we're talking about how important the particulars are. I I hope we also are remembering, and I can't believe we're not, to also ask for healing for a really battered and bruised country that is hard to even recognize right now, and hope that we can somehow get back to a country we do recognize and love. Ba'avur she'anach mitpalalim ba'avuram, bishchar zeh hakadosh baruch hu yimalei rachamim aleihem, lahachalimam ulrapotam, lahachazikam ulahachayotam, v'yishlach lehem mehera refuah shlema, refuat hanefesh urefuat haguf, Shabbat himilis ok refuah krova lavo, hashtaba agala vizman kariv, v'nomar amen.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you for bringing in that note of remembering how much there is to pray for in terms of healing, not just of the way we think of healing, but the broader scale of healing. And before I turn it over to my mom for the Haftarah, I do want to read a couple more excerpts from Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail that I've kind of chosen in place of what we would call the prayer for our country, that I think have a lot of resonance with those words that we're a little bit more used to saying, and also obviously rang true almost 60 years ago when he wrote them, probably rang true hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, and certainly still have a really, really deep resonance today. So I'm going to read a couple more excerpts now. I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow, provincial, outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. Human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts of men willing to be co-workers with God. And without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation. We must use time creatively, in the knowledge that time is always right to do right. Now is the time to make real the promise of democracy and transform our pending national elegy into a creative psalm of brotherhood. Now is the time to lift our national policy from the quicksand of racial injustice to the solid rock of human dignity. Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away, and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities, and in some not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all their scintillating beauty. And we'll turn from the words of Reverend King to the words of Ezekiel. And I invite my mom, who has already unmuted herself, to continue on the train of Matthew's participation this morning and lead us in the Haftarah, which, if you have an Eitz Chaim, can be found on page 370. And I will put the words up on the screen.
Thanks, Alex. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bahar b'nviim tovim v'ratza b'divreihem hanemarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'torah v'Moshe avdo u'Yisrael amo Uvinviei ha'emet v'tzedek ko amar Adonai Elohim v'kavtzi et Beit Yisrael min ha'amim asher nafotu bam v'nikdashti bam le'nei hagoyim v'yashvu al admatam Asher natati la'avti li'Yaakov, v'yashvu aleh lavetach, uvanu vatim v'natu chramim, v'yashvu lavetach, ba'asoti shvatim b'chol hashatim otam misfi votam, v'yadu ki ani Adonai Elohechem b'shana ha'asiri b'shnayim asar lachodesh hayat var Adonai Elai lomar ben Adam sim panecha al paro melech Mitzrayim V'hinaveh alav al Mitzrayim kula, daber ve'amarta, ko amar Adonai Elohim, hineni alecha paro melech Mitzrayim, hatanim hagadol, haravetz b'toch ye'orav, asher amar li'ori v'ani asitini, V'natati hachiyim bilchayecha v'hidbakti degat yorecha v'kaskisotecha v'ha'aliticha mitoch yorecha v'eit kol degat yorecha v'kaskisoticha tidbak unatashticha hamidbara otcha ve'et kol degat yorecha al pnei hasadet tipol lo teasef velo tikavet l'chayat haaretz l'of hashamayim netatich l'ochla v'yadu kol yoshvei Mitzrayim ki ani Adonai yan heyotam mishenet kaneh levet Yisrael b'tov sam b'chapcha teirot uvakata lahem kol chatef uvihisa anam alecha tishaver v'amerata lahem kol motnayim lachein ko amar Adonai Elohim hineni mevi alayich harev v'ichrati mimech Adam uvehema v'haita eretz Mitzrayim lishmama v'chorba v'yadu ki ani Adonai yan amar yorli v'ani asiti lachein hineni elecha ve'el yorecha v'natati et eretz Mitzrayim l'chorvot chorev shemama mimigdol speinei vad gvul kush lo ta'avor ba regel adam v'regel behema lo ta'avor ba lo teshev 40 shana v'natati et eretz Mitzrayim shemama b'toch aratzot nishamot ve'areha b'toch arim charavot tihiyena shmama 40 shana v'hafitzoti et Mitzrayim bagoyim v'zeiretim ba'aratzot ki ko amar Adonai Elohim miketz 40 shana kabetz et Mitzrayim min ha'amim asher nafotzu shama v'shavti et shavut Mitzrayim v'hashivoti otam eretz patros al eretz mechuratam v'yusham mamlacha shifala min hamachot tiyeh shifala v'lo tnaseod al hagoyim v'him atim levilti redot bagoyim v'lo yiyeh Levet Yisrael miftach mazkir avon בפנותם אחריהם, וידעו כי אני אדוני אלוהים, ויהי ב-27 שנה, בראשון באחד לחודש, היה דבר אדוני אלי לאמור, בן אדם, נבוכדרצר מלך בבל, העביר את חילו עבודה גדולה אל צור, כל ראש מוכרך וכל כתף מרוטה, ושחר לא היה לו לחילו מצור, על העבודה אשר עבד עליה, לכן כה אמר אדוני אלוהים, הנני נותן לנבוכדרצר מלך בבל את ארץ מצרים, ונשא המונה, ושלל שללה ובזה ביזה, והייתה שכר לחילו, פעולתו אשר עבד בה, נתתי לו את ארץ מצרים, אשר עשו לו נאום אדוני אלוהים, ביום ההוא הצמיח קרן לבית ישראל, ולך אתן ביטחון בתוכן, וידעו כי אני אדוני. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, צור כל העולמים, צדיק בכל הדורות, היה הנאמן, האומר ועושה, המדבר ומקיים, שכל דבריו אמת וצדק. נאמן אתה הוא אדוני אלוהינו, ונאמנים לדבריך, ודבר אחד מדבריך, אחור לא ישוב ריקם, כי אל מלך נאמן ורחמן אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני, היה הנאמן בכל דבריו. רחם על ציון כי בית חיינו, ולעלובת נפש תושיע במהרה בימינו, ברוך אתה אדוני. משמח ציון בבניה, שמחנו אדוני אלוהינו באליהו הנביא עבדיך, ובמלכות בית דוד משיחך, במהרה יבוא ויגל ליבנו, על כיסא לא ישב זר, ולא ינחלו עוד אחרים את כבודו, כי בשם קודשך נשבעת לו, שלא יכבה נרו לעולם ועד, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן דוד. על התורה ועל העבודה ועל הנביאים ועל יום השבת הזה שנתת לנו, אדוני אלוהינו, לקדושה ולמנוחה, לכבוד ולתפארת. על הכל, אדוני אלוהינו, אנחנו מודים לך ומברכים אותך, יתברך שמך בפי כל חי, תמיד לעולם ועד, ברוך אתה אדוני. מקדש השבת.
Amen. Thank you so much, Mom. Yash koach. Beautiful as always. And now I will turn it to your upstairs neighbor. His Josh, and after that we can take a poll about, which of your favorite Matthews participated this morning. So that'll be our finale. Pops, glad to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks, Judy. To start our consideration of the scientific explanations for the plagues, let's consider some basic epidemiologic principles and some geography and history. There's much disagreement among biblical scholars and commentators, but there are some facts we can accept, if for no other reason than that they support the scientific theories. There are three keys to any epidemiological study: time, when did the illness occur? Place, where did it occur? And person, in whom did it occur? The answers to these questions help clinicians determine the cause of an illness. Let's proceed on the assumption that the time of the first plague was in June, an assertion consistent with the description in the Chumash. And the place for the Egyptians was Memphis, probably in the vicinity of present-day Cairo, and Goshen, where the Israelites lived, was somewhat to the north and east, away from the Nile River and away from the Egyptian population center. Keeping those facts in mind, we can begin our examination of the plagues. An event for anyone who lives along a great river
is springtime flooding. These floods, and this is especially true of the Nile, are often accompanied by great deposits of silt, which cloud the water, muddying it, even to the point of turning it reddish brown, or to some, the color of blood. Dam, the first plague. Another possibility might be something familiar to those of you who live in the Newburyport area. That would be the so-called red tide, the algae blooms that occasionally befoul inshore water, darkening it with a reddish hue. This condition occurs primarily in salt water, but it is not unknown in freshwater. Regardless of whether it was silt or something else, the effect was the same. The water was deprived of oxygen and the fish died. So not only did the Egyptians lose a significant source of food, they were also deprived of potable water. They didn't even have water in which to bathe, so soon they began to stink as much as the dead fish that littered the shores of the Nile. The Israelites in the land of Goshen, away from the Nile, obviously would have been less affected by this plague. And then came the frogs, Fardea, the second plague, which was directly related to the first. With the death of the fish, there were no natural predators for tadpoles, which quickly became frogs, perhaps millions of them, and they multiplied like frogs, until they had nothing to eat and began to die themselves. Or, driven by hunger, they hopped far from the river banks to inhospitable land and died and dried up and rotted, adding to the stench, giving further disincentive for the Egyptians to bathe, which in turn would have left them vulnerable to the third plague, kinim, lice. Whether the plague was actually lice or some other creeping or flying creature, the Egyptians and their animals, having not bathed for almost 2 months by then, would have been ideal hosts. The Israelites, on the other hand, lived far enough inland that they would not have been disturbed by the frogs and would have had continued access to their sources of water, which probably would have been wells. They were able to bathe, so they escaped the third plague. By now, it would have been late summer. There would still have been a lot of rotting dead fish and frogs around, as well as rotting vegetation exposed as the Nile receded from its flood stage. These were conditions that were ripe for something, and that something was the fourth plague, a rove, a swarm of beasts. Some commentators and some Haggadahs interpret this as wild animals. More credible, however, are those who suggest that the fourth plague was again caused by insects. Suspects for these aggressors are several. Common housefly, a nuisance certainly, not an actual plague. The horsefly, which doesn't bite you so much as biopsy you. The sandfly, which as any beachgoer knows, can seem like a plague. The tsetse fly, which can cause African sleeping sickness, or the stable fly, which can seem like a double plague because both the males and females bite. With most insects, only the females bite because they need blood to lay eggs. Whatever they were, the Egyptians would have considered them the result of Moses' prophecy. The one good thing about insects, however, is that they tend to have short lifespans. So both the third and fourth plagues, while horrible enough, would have been short, within the 7-day time period the Chumash gives for each plague. Another thing about insects is that they tend to live their lives in very compact areas, or at least they did before the days of intercontinental travel. So it is entirely possible that Memphis was infested and not Goshen, where the Israelites lived. Just that there are a variety of insects from which to choose for the cause of the third and fourth plagues, there are a number of animal diseases that could be the cause of the fifth plague, dever, pestilence. These include anthrax, hoof and mouth disease, dum-dum fever, and several diseases that can affect humans, among them Rift Valley fever and African sleeping sickness. Any would be a likely cause of the fifth plague. And because they would not be spread outside of an infected flock or herd or group of people, the Israelites' animals far from the site of the outbreak and the Israelites would have been spared. There are a number of possible causes for the sixth plague, Shaheen, which was generally translated as boils. These include African tick typhus, one of any number of poxes, such as smallpox or chickenpox, or something called orf, which is a pox disease of sheep that is known to be spread to humans. Any of them could have swept through the Egyptian population centers quickly and run their course without spreading farther. Or perhaps the sixth plague was the residual result of suppurating and infected sores or the bug bites of the third and fourth plagues. The seventh plague, Barad, hail, is easy to understand, and chronologically the timing would have been right for a huge hailstorm that injured or even killed humans and animals and damaged winter crops, but only in a small area. With the description of the seventh plague, we are at the end of this week's Parsha. The writers of Vayera, like any good thriller writers, leave you hanging about the remaining three plagues, perhaps to entice you to return for next week's service. But spoiler alert, even though I plan to come back next week, I intend to turn you back to Alex then. So with his prior approval, I'm going to continue with the explanations for the eighth and ninth plagues, and especially the most mysterious of them all, the 10th plague. The eighth plague, Arbeh, locusts, is another one that is easy to understand. Swarms of locusts are referred to with some frequency in the Bible and are not uncommon in Africa and the Middle East even today. And as fearsome as they are, they depart as suddenly as they arrive and wreak their havoc on a relatively small area. There are a number of possible explanations for the ninth plague, Choshech, darkness. Could have been an eclipse, but that doesn't last but a few minutes. Dense fog is possible, but probably wouldn't make it dark enough. Volcanic ash would work, but there simply is no history or geology to support it, at least at the time the Exodus is supposed to have occurred. The only possible recorded volcanic eruption in the region occurred on the Greek island of Santorini in the Aegean Sea around 1500 BCE, and that's way before the events of the Parsha. The most likely possibility is a sandstorm of monstrous proportions, such as strikes the Middle East much in the way blizzards strike us in the Northeast, or at least have in previous years. And just as a blizzard can darken the sky for a few days and keep you confined to your home for several days afterward because of the drifts, so too will a sandstorm cause similar disruption to normal living. And sandstorms, like any meteorological phenomenon, are local events, capable of paralyzing one neighborhood and leaving another untouched. Okay, so plagues 1 through 9 are relatively easy to explain. Number 10, Makat Becharot, the death of the firstborn, is harder. At least one source says that after Moses issued his last warning to the Pharaoh, civil unrest broke out as the firstborn, fearing for their lives after suffering through the 9 previous plagues, attacked the royal palace, seeking to force Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. The result was bloodshed, not at the hand of the Lord, but at the hands of the Egyptian army. That may not be totally implausible. Pharaohs and other members of the royal and ruling families had multiple wives, so there could conceivably have been an army comprised of many first sons. Let's not consider that, though, if for no other reason that it doesn't fit our epidemiological thesis. Most of the common infectious diseases an epidemiologist would consider have to be discounted. First of all, they kill indiscriminately. The youngest as well as the eldest may be victims. Also, most epidemics kill people but not animals. Finally, the 10th plague caused death within hours and with no symptoms. Given our history of the past 10 months, we might be inclined to suspect a virus like COVID-19. Maybe, but given the plagues that have preceded the 10th, a more likely explanation points to microtoxins, fungi that grow on stored foodstuffs causing grain to turn moldy. Low doses over long periods of time may not be harmful. Large doses in a short period of time can cause organ failure. It's like eating a poisoned mushroom. And there are documented outbreaks with significant mortality throughout the last century even, especially in World War I Russia, when starving people broke into grain stores, as the Egyptians must have done after months of famine brought about by plagues of disease and climate. Who gets to eat first in most families? Right, generally the firstborn. And in every animal grouping, right again, the biggest, who usually are the eldest. Why didn't younger Egyptians also die? Because they stopped eating after their older siblings sickened. The Israelites, of course, either had no stores to dig into or they had no need to use them because they had not been affected by the plagues. As Josephus Flavius said, it's totally up to you if you want to accept these explanations. But if the question is not, did it happen that way, but could it have happened that way, it is, as described in the Parsha, the answer is yes. Now let's turn to the last scientific discipline that I mentioned earlier, sociology. I said that I was going to avoid political commentary in discussing this Parsha. So I conclude this, as I conclude this talk, think not of our soon-to-be former president or of any other ruthless strongmen of the past or even the present. Rather, think of yourself. Let us consider why the plagues happened and what the answer to that question might mean for us. The answer that we read is in the Parsha, and it seems easy because Pharaoh's heart stiffened or hardened, or because he became stubborn, depending upon which translation you prefer. At the beginning, at least, this unnamed dictator is so filled with arrogance and the confidence of his own might and the rectitude of his policies that he is unwilling to admit error or diminish in any way his own image of himself. Each choice the Pharaoh made it more likely that he would resist, both to spare himself the embarrassment of admitting he was wrong and to uphold his own self-image of a person who would not yield to the threats of someone he deemed to be inferior to himself. I know that there is some in this virtual room who will be tempted to see this as a modern political allegory. But even if we're in Zoom shul, it's still shul, where temptation should be avoided under any circumstances. So let's not go there. Besides, it's not quite as simple as that. I think it will be instructive to look at the explanations of two of the experts cited in Eitz Chaim. First, Maimonides, who wrote, "Sometimes a man's offense is so grave that he forecloses the possibility of repentance." The social psychologist Erich Fromm put it this way: Pharaoh's heart hardens because he keeps on doing evil. The longer he refuses to choose the right, the harder his heart becomes, until there is no longer any freedom of choice left to him. Let us think for a moment as we prepare to conclude our services this morning about what this means for us in our daily interactions with our partners, our wives, our husbands, our friends and relatives, our children, or our coworkers. Yes, most of us probably argue from time to time about whatever is the preeminent issue of the day that is featured on the front pages or the sports pages in the mainstream media or the cable news shows or the internet. But most of the domestic tension in our lives stems from discussions of matters far less provocative, the routine frustrations of daily living, especially during this time of our own plague. The problem is these minor disagreements can quickly spiral into accusations and recriminations. Our hearts harden. Or, as Milton put it more poetically, referring to Adam and Eve, the originators of the domestic quarrel, quote, "Thus they in mutual accusation spent the fruitless hours, but neither self-condemning, and of their vain contest appeared no end." So, What can we do to prevent our hearts from hardening? Unlike Pharaoh, we generally are not warned of impending disaster, but we don't have to wait for even one plague, much less 10 of them, to befall us before we attempt to ameliorate the situation either. And that, I believe, is the lesson of today's Parsha. Do not let our hearts become hardened by our own arrogance or stubbornness. Do not become believers in our own blamelessness. These may be thoughts more appropriate for Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur rather than a random Shabbat in January. But if we think of them with some frequency between now and then, maybe we'll have less to worry about come Yom Tov. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thanks, Pops. Great words and a good, certainly a good take-home message as we, have been spending so much time in close confines and intimate encounters of just the benefit of continued patience and working with each other and not against each other, and really trying to hold those ideals up of not letting our hearts be hardened. I do, normally I would say we're running a little late, but it's gross enough out in Newburyport that I can't imagine anyone's running off to go for a walk or do anything outside. So if anyone does have any, questions or comments, we can take a couple minutes, or if we've hit that point where it's just time to go to the end, we can work towards the end. But I do want to open it up for a minute or two, see if anyone had anything they wanted to share. Yeah, Mike, please.
First, let me say that was excellent. It was spellbinding. Stephen, that was terrific. That explanation, I'd never heard all that put together before, like you did. I wanted to comment though, Barry Pastor might remember this, I think. We had a men's club meeting, or it was a regional in Camp Ramah in Palmer, Massachusetts. And we had a speaker, Dr. Richard Freund, who's also a rabbi, and he's an archaeologist. And he went through some explanation, not about the plagues, but that the Exodus really occurred, and he gave a lot of citations. So so Bruce asked a question too. So apparently there was, during some point in time in Egyptian history, the pharaohs were overthrown, or another dynasty came in, and there was a lot of turmoil, and there was evidence of the slave revolt. And it's in the Egyptian Museum, and I believe that he said it was hidden from view, but if you know where it is, you can find it in the basement, and the Egyptians didn't want to admit it, but it's there. And that there's also other types of relics, I'll say, of an exodus of a small group, and his translations of the Torah, the word Eleph is important, because I'm going into too much detail, but I'm sorry. But if a small group might not be detected wandering through the desert and all this other stuff, and I'll just leave it at that. Dr. Richard Freund. Barry said something too, but I'm through. Okay, thanks.
I have a confession to make. As I said, I had given a version of this presentation a number of times in our synagogue in the Bronx, but not recently. The research I did at the time, certainly the last time I did it, did not indicate that. But from what I learned at the time, there is scant evidence of the Israelites being in Egypt in large numbers, and scant evidence of an exodus the size that the Humash presents. I'm not an archaeologist, not even an epidemiologist, in fact. You can, as Josephus Flavius said you can accept this or not, depending upon your interest. I don't doubt it, Mike. If we ever get to Cairo and get to the Egyptian Museum, we'll try and find that.
Yeah, and also in response to both a little bit to Mike and to Bruce, there are, you know, there are pretty extensive Torah commentaries that do touch on kind of what contemporaneous records do exist, right? Like what kind of history we do have from that time. And so Bruce, if I remember after Shabbos, I can send you some references from some of the JPS material that talks about, you know, kind of what we would expect to be there that we don't find in terms of record keeping, or even some hints that we might have, you know, of things that actually carried through from that time. But like my dad, I'm not an archaeologist, and that's a little bit outside of my realm of expertise as well.
Barry, just to end on a somewhat flippant note, I don't doubt that there is a wreckage of chariots found in the Red Sea. Here in New York, we had an entire two-part bus go off a viaduct and onto the Cross Bronx Expressway the other day. So it's entirely possible.
Any other questions or comments before we move on to the end of the services? And obviously at this point, you know, my parents are familiar figures, so if you want to follow up, they're always happy to make themselves available, I think. And you know, regulars on Saturday morning and Tuesday evening and pretty much any other Zoom. So if you think of something that you want to follow up with my dad about, I'm sure he would love to continue the conversation. I'm going to go ahead and close the ark, and we will move towards the end of services. And we will continue with the full Kaddish, which I will not put up on the screen, but I invite everyone to unmute to respond to the Kaddish. Yikala v'ikadash me'rabah.
Amen.
Ve'almad
Amen.
yivachritei ve'amlich malchutei b'chayachon ve'machon v'chayim v'chol beit Yisrael ba'agalav v'zman kari v'meru.
Amen.
Hesh Rab min Shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al Yisrael v'meru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al Yisrael v'meru.
Amen.
And we'll go back on mute, and we will continue with the Aleinu. I invite you to rise, and I will put it up on the screen. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, v'atei gedula liotzer b'reshit, shelo asanu kegoyei haratzot, velo samanu k'mishpachot hadama, shelo sam chelkeinu kahem, v'gor aleinu kechol hamonam, v'anachnu korim u'mishtachavim u'modim, Lifnei melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu shehu noteh shamayim v'yosed haaretz u'moshe v'ikaro b'shamayim imal shchinatu zo b'gavhei meronim hu Eloheinu einod emet malkeinu efes zulato kakatuv b'torato v'yadata yom hashivota Elevadecha ki Adonai hu Elohim b'shamayim imal v'al haaretz mitachat einod kakatuv b'toratecha v'naim loch le'olam va'ed v'ne'emar v'haya Adonai le'melech al kol haaretz Vayom hahu, Yeh Adonai echad, Ushemo, Ushemo, Ushemo Echad. And in just a moment, I'll ask everyone to unmute to participate in the Mourner's Kaddish. This week, Congregation Ahavas Achim marks the Yortzeitin of Mary Perlman, Crane Kantrowitz, Florence Gold, David Fish, and Betty Gollum. May their memories be a blessing. Please join me in the Mourner's Kaddish.
Yitadal v'yitadash shemei rabah.
Amen.
V'yomad divra kirutei v'yamlik malkutei v'kaye kon v'yomei kon v'chaye dekol beit Yisrael v'agala v'zman koriv v'imru.
Amen.
Yehei shmei rabah
Mevarach ve'olam
Olam
va'ed.
V'yiparak v'yishtabak v'yitpar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei dekudashah.
Brichu.
Le'elam min kol birkata v'shirata tishtapata v'nechemata dam miran v'yomad v'imru.
Amen.
Yehei shlomo rabba min shemayel v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Amen.
Oseh shalom b'mamav hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Amen.
May be seated one more time. Shabbat shalom, everyone. And thank you so much, and Yasher Koach to everyone who participated in this morning's service. Judy Matthews, and of course, Steve Matthews, and Sharon, and Mike, and Janny, and Max. Really, really great. And Barry, and everyone else. Great to see so many smiling faces and hear so many different voices. Couple quick announcements. First of all, tomorrow at 4 p.m., we're going to be joined by Dr. Josh Tarkin and Dr. Joe Gross to talk about both their experiences getting the COVID vaccine and how exactly the vaccines getting rolled out will kind of impact our day-to-day lives. It should be a really interesting conversation and a great opportunity to get your questions answered. I encourage you to come with the questions you may have. They're both really excited to share their own knowledge and their expertise with the wider community. That's tomorrow at 4. And then, of course, Tuesday we have Adult Ed. Thursday morning we have the Minyan. And then a week from Tuesday, so not this coming Tuesday, but I believe it's the 26th, we actually are going to be having a Tu B'Shvat Seder. We're going to be working with Congregation Shirat Hayam, which is in Swampscott, and Rabbi Michael Rogozin, who kind of had a Seder in his back pocket and is generous enough to kind of invite us to share it with his community and to kind of make it a little bit of a wider celebration. So mark that on your calendars. And then actually at the end of next week, there's also a lot going on. There is the Shabbat Chai, the musical Friday night service that will be taking place at the end of the month on the 29th. And then, of course, on the 31st, we're going to be having the Jewish End of Life workshop, which Mike and Joel and I have been working on. So definitely a lot coming up. Please stay tuned to the e-blast. Any other announcements or things that you want the community to know about before we conclude services this morning? Great. Well, definitely keep a close eye on the e-blast, and I hope to see many of you tomorrow afternoon. And of course, feel free to invite friends or family who you think would benefit from learning a little bit more about the public health situation around us. Other than that, we will now move towards the end of services and conclude with Hatikva, followed by the Shamra. Kol balev penima nefesh Yehudi homiah fatei mizrach kadima ayin letzion Sophia Olo abda tikvatenu ha'tikva bat shnot alpayim liyotam chofshi be'artzenu Eretz Zion Yerushalayim Liotam chofshi be'artzeinu Eretz Zion Yerushalayim. And please join me for Kiddush. Veshamru b'nei Yisrael et haShabbat la'asot et haShabbat le'dorotam berit olam. Veshamru b'nei Yisrael et haShabbat la'asot et haShabbat le'dorotam berit olam. Beini uvein b'nei Yisrael oti le'olam oti le'olam. Veshamru b'nei Yisrael et haShabbat la'asot et haShabbat le'dorotam berit olam. Ki shesh yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz veshamru b'nei Yisrael et haShabbat la'asot et haShabbat le'dorotam berit olam. Ubayom hashvi Shabbat vayinafash Shabbat vayinafash veshamru b'nei Yisrael et haShabbat la'asot et haShabbat le'dorotam berit olam. Al ken bracha le'yom hashvat v'yigasheyu sabri.
L'chaim.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol yeh b'dvaro.
Amen.
Amen.
Shabbat shalom, everyone. Thank you all
Shabbat
again.
shalom.
Shalom.
Have a safe and warm and dry
Shabbat
week.
shalom, everybody.
Good to see you.
Shalom, everybody.
See everybody.
Yeah, I'm sorry I deserted you on the Kiddush there, but
Yeah. Thank you, Stephen, very much. That was great.
Have a good week and stay safe.
Fantastic.
Yes, fantastic
Stephen. It was
lecture.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed the biology for a
everybody.
change.
Be well.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Nice seeing you, Judy.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Yes.
Bye.
Yeah. Betty, Hank, Ilana, Lily, Ezra,
Michael.
and Rhonda. Hi, Rhonda.
What? Bye.
Yeah.
Bye, Barry. Barry's.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Nice. Bye.
Sandy, Norman, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Just
Shabbat
terrific. Both
Shalom.
of you, wonderful. Alana, hi.
And Leslie, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Joel, you too.
Good days, everybody.
Good days. Stay well.